Brandon Birkmeyer is a seasoned marketing consultant and brand strategist with over 2 decades of experience advising Fortune 100 companies, including Coca-Cola and Apple. He's the author of his brand new book, Front and Center Leadership. It's an amazing book. It's a comprehensive guide that offers actionable steps for leaders to build authority, influence, and credibility through personal branding. Would you please welcome to Dealcasters, Mr. Brandon Birkmeyer. Brandon, thank you for coming, man. Yeah, we need that.
Yeah, where's the audio button with the crowd noise?
You know, I don't know. For me, it's a little cheesy to do that. It's not on brand for us, Brandon.
You say that, but then there was such a vibe. The intro to the show that rolled for, was it 17 minutes?
Yeah, it was 16
music.
actually. Yeah,
yeah. But no crowd cheers for Brandon. That's fine.
Listen, I've got him here. You know, but it's just I feel like I need like more of 100,000 people. This feels like the one they give you in the Rodecaster Pro sounds like more like 15 people.
I almost feel after, hate to go back to football, but I went to the Carolina ODU game at South Carolina and, they start Sandstorm, right? So maybe that's what we need to work into our intro.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
That's where they're all waving the towels as Okay. It's like everybody's jumping up and down.
The song Sandstorm by Derude.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
It's like an old EDM song.
Yeah. I've been stumped already. Brandon, man, thank you. Thank you for coming to the show. I just, we run in different circles, but some of the same circles. And I met you at a conference. It could have been, a Podfest, could have been Podcast Movement. It could have been NSA. And a lot of these things, overlap and Jim as well. And I don't know, we just seem to be just kind of attracted to each other in terms of hey, we're talking, when I talked to you at Podfest, I think, maybe 3 or 4 Podfests ago, I was like, what's going on with you? Because you're a successful podcast host with Brands on Brands, which is a fantastic podcast. And if anybody wants to really get some valuable information, that's a great podcast to subscribe to. But I was like, man, what's going on with you? And you're like, you know what I really want to start doing is getting on more stages, doing more keynote speaking and I introduced you to a few people. A few months later, I'm looking on LinkedIn, I'm seeing you in front of a ton of people. I'm seeing you on a bunch of stages. And I was like, okay, this guy just didn't say I want to do it. And then it didn't really happen. So talk to me about that journey, maybe initially, before we get into the book. How is the speaking thing going for you?
Yeah, it's going well. It's all smoke and mirrors, what you see online, obviously. Just make that stuff up with some green screen. But no, how's it really going? So like anything else, I take on a project every year and I figure out what's the thing that I want to focus on. And the actual start of the year was speaking. This is 2 years ago, I think, when we spoke. And to do that, I, joined the National Speakers Association. I joined a bunch of YouTube channels and consumed the school of YouTube. And I, through the National Speakers Association, found a speaking coach, took their speaker program. So I learned the craft, I learned the skill and the business of speaking. And my coach, as I was getting into this, I was like, what can I do? What's my first go to action that'll really help me get going other than just pitch. And his advice was, Brandon, you should write a book. It was the only thing I didn't want him to say, right? I don't know, I have a podcast, a YouTube channel, I write blogs, I'm on social media. I'm like, please don't make me write a book. It feels like old man style of building a personal brand. So I'm like, don't make me do that, please. But that's what he said. And I respect my elders. I respect the people that have been doing this as professionals. And I said, okay, well, how do I do that? So that started me down this other path where the next project, I had to put speaking on hold and the book became the project. So that sent me down the next road. But yeah, along the way, I'm still pitching the ideas from the book on stages, even before the book was done.
Man, that's incredible. And Jim, I know you run in circles with a lot of the NSA folks, and So anything to add to the whole speaker thing?
Yeah, I think that's definitely probably one of the biggest things they tell these folks that are wanting to become speakers is like, you got to have, I mean, the book is almost like, I hate to say it, like your business card. It validates you. And what I think people have to remember, I mean, I don't know, maybe not in Brandon's case with his book, you're not going to become a millionaire with your book, but what it's going to do is it's kind of like that, hey, you read the book and then it's like, okay, now I know why I want to work with this person. So I think that becomes part of it. But I think too, you know, because Brandon definitely poured his heart and soul into this book. You know, what I get concerned about is seeing people are using AI to just throw out a book. And I don't think that's the same thing. So what are your thoughts on that, Brandon?
Well, I'm lucky I didn't write the book with AI, or I'd be really eating, pie in my face right now, or whatever that eating crow. Thanks for asking if I wrote it with AI. No, it was written all by me specifically, dictated and then edited and used professional editors to put this thing together. But no, I don't fear AI, but I think what will happen is that the book space will become crowded, just like everything else does when it becomes super accessible. And the bad elements, the people who want to use just AI and no original ideas, will make books that are kind of watered down and garbage. And others will make books that are still creative and wonderful and that use AI. I mean, great, that helps. But for me, it wasn't even about that. But yeah, I like that there's tools. I like tools out there to help. I definitely appreciated that there's tools out there that help me, who's not a designer, like make a cover. And this wasn't accessible. I formatted this book myself. I went in and did all the internal paging and everything else. And then KDP, you can self-publish through Amazon KDP. These tools are amazing.
Yeah.
That we now have to make these things a reality. There's no gatekeepers stopping you from being a thought leader in this world. And I think that ties into what I believe in. So most of the things I do, like this book, like speaking, like podcasting, I go back and I turn around and I figure out, how do I make this so that anyone can do it? And then I try to teach that. So at my heart, I'm a coach, I'm a mentor, I'm a speaker and an educator. So everything I create or I do, I'm like, how can I make this something I can teach someone else? So when I started a podcast, I did that the hard way, figured out how to do it, hired a coach, and then I, created programs and online courses for how to start podcasts. And now that I was in the book writing process, I have materials and coaching about how to write a book. And then so everything's a step. And now it's like how to speak and all those things. So at the end of the day, it's all in my world. I call it personal branding. It's all these things that we do to help us leverage thought leadership and put ourselves out there in ways where your reputation might help either get you that job, bring you that client, or build that dream business that you're hoping to build.
That's incredible because it's just in those last three sentences, we can hear your why, right? It's not, there's no question. You have the heart of a teacher, and a lot of people that think that someone who's in maybe the business that you're in, that we're in it to get money, right? And of course, money comes along. You got to pay bills, right? But if that's your ultimate goal, I mean, you're gonna be jumping from thing to thing relatively quickly. But if you have the satisfaction of showing someone and teaching someone how they can be successful, I feel like that's got to be a lot more satisfying. What are some stories maybe of people that you've helped that whether it's the personal branding space or maybe some stories that has because the book's been out for a few months and maybe by now you've gotten some feedback from some people who have read the book and how has it impacted them?
Yeah, so it's funny when you do something like this, you never know what kind of feedback you're going to get. And when I wrote the book, I really wrote it for the me from, back in the day. So if people don't know, I spent 17 years in corporate. And to your point about purpose, if I wanted to be making money, I would have stayed in corporate. That was, the golden
Yep.
goose paycheck. Being an entrepreneur is not easy. It doesn't pay as well. And it's a pain. It's a lot of work. You have to have a calling for that kind of thing. And I don't sell widgets. I sell, experience and coaching and teaching. So it's definitely a harder road. But for me, I wrote the book and I teach basically me from back in the day. So when I was coming up in corporate, there were these walls that I would hit or ceilings I would hit along the way.
We'll get right back to the show, but first I wanted to tell you about Social Media News Live. Jeff C. and his amazing guests will keep you up to date on what's happening in this entire changing world of social media. They talk with industry experts and innovators and creators about the latest social media news, tips, and tactics, and they broadcast live, so you can ask the questions that matter most to you and your business. Jim and I love this show, and we know that you will too. Head over to socialmedianewslive.com. Hey, tell them Dealcaster sent you. Now back to the show.
And it wasn't until I became an entrepreneur and I looked back that I realized that most of it was reputation driven. So I had a resume and great experience, but I didn't have a reputation outside of my resume. I didn't have a network that would like really serve me. I didn't know CMOs and CEOs and those kinds of things. I wasn't out there building those kinds of relationships. I was just doing my job. I didn't have any influence in my space. I didn't have any thought leadership per se out in the world. I had never written anything or put anything on, the interwebs. I had no blog posts, no speaking in my background. I just did my job, created business plans and marketing plans and presented them to CMOs and got paid. And then I looked back and I jumped into entrepreneurship. And guess what you need when you're an entrepreneur? You need a network. You need a little bit of influence. You need some credibility that you can do the job you say you can do. And I was like, man, now I got to build this for my business. Why didn't I do that for myself? And when I was coming up in corporate as a professional in my space, why didn't I build my network? Why didn't I learn these things? So really the book isn't about how to be a leader, because there's a lot of books like that right now. What it is the path to leadership. For the people who are out there who already have leadership skills, I know there's a lot of them who get overlooked. And it's not because they don't have team building skills or communication skills. It's because they hadn't put themselves out there in a way to stand out and to get noticed. So this book is really personal branding for leaders. It's that path to leadership so that you can get recognized and promoted to say, I see what you're doing. Like, now I get it.
Wow.
So that's why the book's out.
Yeah, I think so many people, when they look at, solopreneurs, and a lot of people got laid off or got fired from their job, and then they become entrepreneurs, and then they learn the lesson that you learned, which is, when somebody would ask you what you did, you just said, I'm regional director of, Orkin, or whatever. You would say, the company, your position in the company you work for. And what you're not talking about that at all. You're like, well, yeah, what do you do for people, that happens to be in that job? Because that's what moves with you when you don't have that job. And so a lot of people are in this position where it's like, whoops, now I am looking at my LinkedIn and all it says I was regional director at Orkin, and not a whole bunch of other stuff that you need, which is your personal brand. And so do most of the people that you work with, are they currently working for these companies and you're helping them build that brand from within that company? Or are they in that spot where they're not with a company and they're entrepreneur or solopreneur, whatever?
Yeah, most of the work I do now is I'm speaking and running workshops and selling that in right now, trying to get more workshops at corporates to say, hey, let's teach 10, 20, 30 of your people the secrets of personal branding, how to do things like write a report for the company, or how to get out there and become on the board of the industry association that they're in, or to be a speaker at their industry conferences. So it's those types of exercises. And I'll tell you this, when the first book first came out, I'd have people that I hadn't spoken to since college reaching out to me, which is funny. And they'd say things like, hey, I'm in between jobs and I'm looking for a way to break through. Like, how many people do you know that are open for work right now on LinkedIn, right? Like, I'm seeing it every day. And it's not just that. Like, you'll see posts that say, I've been at this for a year trying to find a job and I just can't find one. And I got one of those phone calls. Actually, I've had multiple. And when I'm talking to them, I'm like, I can give you some advice for how to, find job access. It's really, for me, it's about networking more than it is about applying on LinkedIn or something like that. It's really about building relationships. But my problem is you're trying to dig the well now that you're thirsty. And so for me, I can give you immediate help, but I'd rather you jump to like a recruiter or something like that to get yourself fed. really this book is sort of like before you become hungry, before you're thirsty, here are the things you should be doing so that you won't have that period of time where it's hard to find a job, where you're competing because your resume looks like everybody else's. I want you to have those relationships and that reputation to back you up. So yeah, I've gotten phone calls that are expecting one thing, but something else kind of happens. But most of the people I'm helping right now, we're really working through, it's a lot more entrepreneurs, one-on-one coaching for the kind of stuff you're talking about. And that stuff is more like, I'm a creator, I'm an entrepreneur, and I don't know the business of personal branding. So each one is different. I work with people very individualized. So in some cases, I already have a large following on whichever platform, but I don't know how to turn that into a expert business, a knowledge business. So it's the other side of things. It's how do you take your personal brand and implement it in a way that is a business? And I'll just to kind of make that make more sense. I really see that there's 6 kind of versions of using your knowledge in a way that gets you paid. There's using it for, like we're doing here, for entertainment, right? You can be a creator out there in the creator economy and hopefully get paid by sponsorships. So you can be a creator, you can be a coach or a consultant, pretty similar in jobs, but slightly different. Coaches people and uses their own ideas to help them. A consultant is out there implementing something within a job to fix something, right? Creators, coaches, consultants. You have the freelancers out there who are doing, time for their skill. You also have the course creators who are out there taking their knowledge and turning it into systems and things that they can implement. And you have speakers. You have people who are getting on stage and getting paid to share their knowledge to an event. And each of these is a different business model. And a lot of us try to tap into them. I know I have had to try tap into each of them. So a lot of the coaching, really, I'm like, here's how you start to build your personal brand. But then they're like, now what? So a lot of my work now is helping people with the now what. But this book brought them in to say, am I checking the boxes first? Have I done all the things that I need to do to start building my platform and my repurposing systems? And do I have my voice figured out for the content I'm creating? So the book really is, I think, the entry point into personal branding. And then when I'm coaching people, usually it's now what?
And Brandon, do you seem to find, and you talk about it in the book about, I think, how some of these people, whether they realize, like, because I always look at too, right? There's a difference between being a manager and being a leader. And I know all 3 of us have worked in big organizations and have kind of seen where people get promoted. They really needed to become a leader, but they're a manager, right? They really don't see that self-development of like, how do I get my team to evolve and become better? But do you think it's that fear of like having to take on the responsibility of being a leader that's holding some of these people back from taking that next step? It's like, it's really easy when you know that if you come to work every day, you're going to have a check, you're going to have benefits, as opposed to if we don't do anything, we don't get anything.
Yeah, I think people have a rational fear, if you will, of that. For me, leadership, if you wanted to make it simply defined, is really just going first, right? Our kids are in their lunch lines and they're the line leader, right? They're the first one in line taking people out to lunch. It doesn't take much to be a leader, but there is something when we're talking about actual leadership, there's something more than just being first. It's choosing to be first. And that choice comes with fears. It comes with the real problems that you can get in trouble for being a leader, because the eyes are on you, right? So in the book, you talk a little bit about it. When I look at this, I realize I've experienced this myself. There's 3 types of what I call reluctance to putting yourself out there, to stepping up and being a leader, to standing out with personal branding or just with projects that people are working on. And the 3 things that people typically run into are what I call classic reluctance, which is like the first type of, you have a real reason, right? Like you didn't want to do something. Like how many times, Jim, or you're out there and you're like, I want to go to dinner with my wife tonight. And you're like, what do you want to eat? I don't know. What do you want to eat? And sushi. Well, I don't know. I just had a bad experience with sushi reason. You have real reasons why you don't want to go to that restaurant or whatever it is. You either don't want it, you're not in the mood, you don't feel like spending that kind of money when you can do this at home. Or you have real reasons that are totally fine to be reluctant for something. That's classic reluctance. It happens in every walk of life, in your job, in your professional decisions, and your personal decisions. There's a second type of reluctance, which I think is a little more sneaky, which I'm very guilty of. I call it thoughtful indecision. And this is where we are a little bit analyzing, trying to get all the facts figured out before we make a decision. We want it to be informed, right? Analysis paralysis. And being an analytical person, that's very natural for me. Like, I want the details. And guess what? A lot of the time, having more time to make a decision means I've made a better decision. But in some cases, having thoughtful indecision means that someone else is passing you by, or maybe a decision needed to be made quickly and you couldn't because you were stuck. So I think that happens to us a lot. And then the third is, I just call it agreeableness. And it's this kind of consensus thinking. And it's hard to be a leader when everyone gets an opinion and no one's making a decision. At some point, like if you and me are all three are voting on something, like every now and then, Jim needs to get a win, right? Like Jim needs a vote. Like,
we're going to get right back to the show, but first I wanted to introduce you to the amazing Cloudlifter CL1 from Cloud Microphones. This amazing little blue box boosts your dynamic podcast mic signal for pristine audio quality in just seconds. Jim and I love ours, and you can snag one of these CL1s or new Cloudlifter X's for yourself from the links in the show notes below. Elevate your audio content with the Cloudlifter. Now, back to the show.
Maybe he needs to stand up for himself, lead, and say, you know what, today, Chris, maybe I'm leading the show. Like, like whatever it might be, like maybe your cup needs to be filled that day, and it's not about consensus that day. So the point is, why do I think about the reluctance in this way? Because the opposite of reluctance for me is initiative. And if we can get past reluctance, maybe we would take initiative to do those things that put us at risk, that speak to us getting past those fears of, okay, maybe I didn't have time to overanalyze it this time. I'm just going to make a decision based on my gut. Or maybe I'm not going to come to consensus this time. I'm going to hear people, but I'm just going to make the decision for the group this time, or I'm going to advocate for myself. And I know I'm talking a little bit in hyperbole, but the point is, like, we are reluctant people by nature. It's what's kept us safe. It's that middle of the pack mentality. And that's okay. I lived my life 17 years like that. And sometimes you got to take risks, right? Sometimes you got to put yourself out there if you want to achieve more than what you're currently getting.
See, now, Brandon, now you're getting under my skin, man. You had to talk about thoughtful indecision as a part of reluctance, and I'm like, oh God, it's like being in the pew at church and the pastor says something, and you're like, oh God, he's talking to me, So no, but it's so true. And do you think, you're a podcaster, and I don't know, you've got hundreds and hundreds of episodes that you've hosted yourself on Brands on Brands, but also have guested on podcasts, like this. And we all know this thing about pod fade, right? They talk about it at all the podcast conferences. Everybody quits after 6 episodes or whatever, because there's a lot of different reasons why they quit. And thoughtful indecision feels like a huge component of that, right? So if you're a content creator, isn't that what what would you say is like the biggest part of reluctance would be that thoughtful indecision part?
I mean, I think it's individual, right? I think we all have experienced it in different ways at different times. I don't think we're always one thing, but I think it represents itself in these different ways. For podcasters, for content creators, I think for a lot of us, what we have is a confidence crisis. Right? We hope this thing will turn on suddenly and everyone will discover us and we'll be viral. And when it doesn't happen, it hurts our feelings, right? And people talk about consistency being the secret to that. I don't know if that's true. What I like to say is, if you want to build confidence in something, anything like these skills that we're talking about, being a content creator, speaking, writing books, to get past the confidence crisis is, for me, you have to do 3 things. You have to know yourself, like yourself, and trust yourself. And people have probably heard know, like, and trust used in other ways, but I'm flipping it for us today, because for me, knowing yourself means that you actually, if you're going to build a show, right, if you're going to be a content creator, you have to understand, what do you like to talk about? What's your passion? What's something that you can talk about every day and not get bored of it? And if it's not aligned with who you are, then it's going to be something you quit. Right? It's going to be something that you're like, I don't want to do this. Like, I'm bored about talking about microphones and, if it was a gear show or whatever.
Right.
Like, you're going to get bored of it. Like, I love personal branding. I love marketing in general. I didn't just do marketing because they paid the bills. It's because I nerded out on marketing. Which you're like, Brandon, what books are you reading? What's your hobby? I'm like, I'm reading marketing books. I'm sorry, it's a little boring. I find that interesting. I find persuasion interesting. I find like marketing funnels and brand building interesting. So anyway, you got to know yourself. You got to know what your message is, and you got to be aligned with what you're putting out is really what's coming from inside you. And then like yourself is after you like put things out there, you've got to give yourself a little bit of room to be like, yeah, I did okay. Like, be proud of yourself. Take time to appreciate your accomplishments and find things that you like that you did and build upon them. Like, build the skills. Like, I would have turned my podcast off if I, like, after a year of doing it, it wasn't better than the first episode. Like, if I invest in the skill of something, the packaging, the skill of speaking, the skill of interviewing, if I keep investing in those skills, that personal development, I'm going to like myself better because I can see the results of that work. So there's that piece. And then the third is trust yourself, which for me just means what you're talking about, what everyone else talks about, which is consistency and like a commitment to the process. I think trust comes from doing the work and looking back and say, yeah, I kept that promise. Like, I did that work, and whether the result was great or not what I expected it to be, I committed to something and I did it. And that shows proof that like you can accomplish something you set your mind to. You just got to have the right goals for that to happen. So, I trust myself. I'll say, I'll look at this podcast. I'll do it for 6 months. I'm not going to question was it successful or not. I'm just going to get better at it every day. And at 6 months, I can make a rational business decision to say, did this work? Do I have the listeners I was hoping for? Did it give me any other benefits I wasn't expecting? And then I can reevaluate. Do I want to keep going for another 6 months? But the only way that works is if during those 6 months, you don't judge yourself day after day, week after week. You're not going to judge yourself until the 6 months is over.
Just like you don't look at your download numbers every day after every podcast episode, right? This is incredible information. And by the way, those of you who are watching and listening, go to dealcasters.live, Amazon, and in the Amazon carousel is Brandon's new book, which we're talking about. This is fantastic information. You know what I thought you were going to do, Brandon, when you did the whole know, like, and trust, and you got to know, like, and trust yourself. I thought when it got to trust yourself, it was going to be like me looking at myself on camera going, would I trust that guy? But it was not that at all. I guess you kind of need to do that too. But I do like the twist there is kind of like trust that you're going to hit those goals and attain those goals. It's important, consistent. A lot of people talk about consistency, right? And they look at consistency as like, do it day after day after day after day, which is not wrong. But if you're just doing the same thing every day and not trying to get better every day, then you're not going to grow. So if you grow that 1% every time, then, it's like going to the gym, right? If you do the same thing, you sit in the corner with a 5-pound dumbbell and do that, for 20 reps every time you go to the gym, you're not gonna necessarily be shredded after 6 months, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, right? Because I was doing research for this book and I stumbled across a lot of like random fun facts. But the one that like once stood out to me was that over 80% of our actions take place automatically without us having to think about it. Like, our brains strive to turn everything into a routine, right? Because it's hard work to like make new decisions or to try something we haven't tried before or improve. And even thinking about it's time consuming and energy depleting. So by nature, our brains are like, you should create a routine around this. Like, you should conserve some energy and maybe minimize some risk, right? Like, that's what it wants to do. And like 80% of our actions are happening like that. That's why you can like blink and suddenly you were driving somewhere and you blink and you were there. You're like, I don't even remember the drive. Like, what just happened?
It's scary.
Yeah. The autopilot, right?
Yeah.
And it's sometimes we need to be shook out of that. Out of those routines to actually grow. Like, we get bored. Like, that's what happens. Like, you're like, why do I not feel great? Like, why do I feel like I'm in a rut? And it's because you're bored. You're not growing. You're not challenging yourself. We need that challenge, even though it comes with a little bit of stress. I'm not gonna lie, it does.
Well, and I think going back to what you're talking about with leadership, as a leader, by you continuously working to improve yourself, right? And I like to say, improvement is just 1% a day, and it doesn't have to be in the same area. So sometimes you don't even see it, but people will start to notice that, hey, this person's getting better. And that encourages them to be, they may be followers initially, but like, you know what? I can do that too. And that makes the whole team better. It moves the ball forward, so to speak. So I think it's important that you talk about that, because it's one of those things people don't always realize. It's like, to me, life and leadership is about continuous learning. It's about continuous improvement. What can I do better? I mean, Chris, as an example, if I would probably say 4 years ago, Chris, you didn't have the video editing experience that you have now or the ability, but you put the work in, right? It didn't happen overnight. People are like, oh, wow, that's really great. I could, and rather than saying, I can learn how to do this, they say, oh, I could never do that, right? Chris is just so much better, as opposed to saying, you know what? I can learn from Chris. I can learn from others like Chris to improve myself in that area, if that's what I'm passionate about. I think the other piece you brought up, Brandon, it's about having the passion for wanting to be good in that space. It does us no good to do things that we don't like doing, thinking that somehow we're going to wake up one day and say, oh, now I like doing this.
We're going to get right back to the show, but first I've got to share this genius tool with you. It's called the PlexiCam. You can say goodbye to awkward eye contact struggles on your live streams, your presentations, Zoom calls. This PlexiCam lets you maintain eye contact effortlessly by simply attaching to your monitor. It's compatible with webcams, phone, DSLRs, you name it. It's like having a personal eye contact assistant. Jim and I both love ours. So level up your eye contact today. Check out the links below. Now back to the show. We're going to get right back to the show, but first I wanted to tell you about the game changer for your audio setup. Of course, it's the one and only Shure SM7B microphone. This iconic beauty is a go-to for top-notch podcasts. You've seen it on stream. It's the perfect microphone for any environment. You don't need a fancy studio. It's got built-in protection that handles background noise like a pro. Jim and I love ours, and you can level up your audio game today. Just check out the show notes for the links. Now back to the show.
Yeah, and what's funny is, like, I'm a big Kobe Bryant fan. You guys were talking sports at the beginning of this.
Oh yeah,
was raised in Los Angeles, big Laker fan in general, and also Michael Jordan fan. Even though I'm not from there, I named my firstborn son Jordan, my only born son Jordan. But it's just fun to say it that way.
Yeah.
But people who, both of them in this regard, people who were just known for their determination. People who were known for, like, they were the ones that showed up early to practice, like, even though they were already the best player on the court. They were known to get in people's heads and have that, like, ruthless determination to win. And that mentality I found very attractive. Not the ruthlessness necessarily, but something about you have this inner drive to accomplish something. And I think I talk about in the book, the 4 laws of leadership, but one of them is you have to have the right reasons. And the right reasons for me is, like, you have to find that for yourself. Like, what's your motivation, right? And it's not like your purpose, which it could be, I guess, for some people. I just find that word hard to grab onto. But I'm like, you give me the, like, right reasons. I can figure that out. Like, what in this one little thing I'm doing right now, like, what's the reason that this thing exists for me? Like, what is a win? Why is this helpful? Why do I want to put effort into this thing that might be hard? And it can't just be because I want to make money, because I can make money lots of ways. So you have to have the reasons that are going to keep you going when things aren't going your way. And that's internal. And I had trouble getting to this sometimes, but my friend Mike Kim, he's in the personal branding space. He asked these questions. I don't know where he got them from. I don't know where they originally came from, but it spoke to me. And one was like, what keeps you up at night? What pisses you off? And what change do you want to see in the world? And I found that super interesting to ponder, right? And it's like, because those things that you answer, you can apply them to small things or big things. But if I look back, I was like, well, being someone who was working in corporate for so long, eventually hitting these ceilings where I wasn't, like, being able to jump to that, like, C-level table, I was like, what is the problem here? And I started to realize that, well, like, I was never told how to do that. Like, no one trains you beyond how to do your job. They don't train you on, like, these other skills outside of your job. And I was like, that pisses me off, that, like, I spent 17 years in a corporate environment with no mentors telling me about the skills of networking, the skills of public speaking, and like self-development in general, this whole category of self-development, which is like, once you go down it, guys, like beware, like you can spend hours listening to podcasts, right? And reading books. But it's so stimulating to the mind. But I digress a little bit. But I guess my point is there's this idea that it pissed me off that there wasn't like someone out there saying, hey, maybe you should take these steps. And I was like, you know what? I can maybe build some work around that. I can solve that problem with a book like this or with a podcast like that. And, answer these questions for yourself. What pisses you off or what keeps you up at night? It keeps me up at night that there's very talented people that when they get to 40 years old, suddenly there's less and less jobs for them at the top of organizations. Like it's built like a pyramid, like hundreds of people at the bottom, a few at the top. What do we do after that? Yeah. Well, if you don't have the skills to transition out of that job into something else, it's going to be a rough road for you. So I'm like, how do I write something that helps those people? And what keeps you up at night? It's like, well, it keeps me up at night that there's people whose talents are going completely unrealized, like untapped potential. And I'd like to see that change. So, things like that. Doesn't have to be purpose, but I think definitely having some type of the right reasons for you is going to help you kind of grow and push towards.
And that really resonates with me, Brandon, because one of the things I've seen a lot, especially like say in the veteran space, is to your point is, when I was in the Marines, I did over 20 years in the Marines, and it was like I was always advancing to like the next position of, leadership, authority, whatever. But then it's like, well, what happens when I get out? I'm not going to have those same opportunities. But because I was so focused on my day-to-day, assignments, I wasn't thinking about like, oh, I need to learn to do this and that's going to help me later. And so I think that's part of that challenge, is making people understand, like, look, you're not always going to be doing what you're doing now. What are those other things that you could be learning? And I think really, to me, it kind of goes back to, right, mentorship, I think is lacking in a lot of places. And so it sounds like in some ways, whether people realize it, when they are reaching out to you, they are looking for some mentorship. Like, I need someone to help guide me, as opposed to tell me what to do.
Yeah. What stood out to me was like the phrase, you don't know what you don't know, and how do you seek out help when you have no idea what you need help with? So we don't even know to ask the question. So we just fall into these routines like we talked about. So that's something I ponder a lot. Like when I find myself kind of doing a little bit of self-analyzing, I have a moment to breathe and not sucked into my day-to-day routine. I'm like, what don't I know? What don't I know about? That's when I'm like, oh, I'm going to take on a project. That helps me focus. I'm like, the project is writing a book. The project is speaking. Now I can actually think about, what don't I know about speaking? Well, like literally anything. Okay. Well, what do I need to know then? Okay. Let me make a plan. Like, what do I need? How do I get around people that know how to do it? How do I like absorb content that's about that? How do I read the books about that? Because you have something to focus on to help you figure out, it's more clear. But if it's just, hey, grow as a person, like, well, I don't know.
Exactly. What do you do with that? That's like, how do you eat an elephant, right?
Yeah. It's like, be a better dad, be a better podcaster, be a better speaker.
Sure.
Like, have better relationships, be a better communicator. You pick one of these things to aim at, suddenly it becomes very apparent what you don't know.
Yeah, I think, what you're talking about is staying curious. And like your friend that, what pisses you off, what excites you, what keeps you up at night. But what you're doing is you're taking that next step is, what excites you? Okay, it's this. Okay, now what are you doing about it? Right? Like, and like taking that next step and adding some practical action steps for yourself, putting a framework around it. So what are for someone that doesn't seem to have that yet? Like, what are, and you coach people, you work with a lot of different people, a lot of different companies, what are some practical strategies maybe that they could, like, hey, I really want to do this and I'm really passionate about this. And, this particular thing pisses me off, but what's a constructive sort of practical way for them to get kind of moving into a direction where they're actually applying solutions and helping people?
Yeah, you want to make it real instead of fluffy? Sure. I could do that. Yeah. No, so here's like real talk. What I would have done Like identify someone who's doing something that you want to do. And whatever it is, it's like they're doing the job you want to do. They have the charisma you want to have. Like find someone that you're like, you are a little envious of, or you're like, that's pretty cool. Like, because you can do that too, whatever it is. And if it was like your boss, like you just want the promotion of your company, great. Like what skills does your boss or your boss's boss have? Like actually analyze them objectively and be like, what are they good at? Oh, wow, they seem to be really good at people and communicating. And they have these client calls where they have so much charisma or they're like really prepared. Like how would you, if you had to be them, what would you need to do to get to that level of skill? Would you need more repetitions? Would you need some mentoring and coaching? Would you need to learn a skill that you didn't already know? What is it? So for me, it helps. It's not just like yes, curious. Like I love the word curiosity, but I feel like it's like we have a bow and arrow, but we don't know where to aim. Right? So be curious about what? Like about football? Sure. I'll know all the stats, right? But if you're not jealous of the guy who knows all the football stats, then maybe don't study that. Maybe that's not the thing to be curious about, right? So like you guys are great at going live. Like, oh, like I envy that. Like I wish I was better at going live and had that confidence. Well, how do they get like that? Well, I might call you guys up and ask you a few questions and be like,
we might tell you.
You might tell me. Yeah. Right? You might. So I'm like, okay, well, there's a skill to this. Like it's different than what I do. And maybe you have more confidence because you have a plan. Like you know how generally your flow is going to go. You've practiced that more than I have. So any of these things, I'm like, pick something and aim at it and say, you know what? Like, what do they have that I could be learning from today?
I love that. I'm a huge fan of influence. Not just the Robert Cialdini book, but what we're talking about is understanding what makes people move, what makes people buy, what makes people understanding that whole concept. And a lot of it is somebody's watching this video right now and they're going, this Brandon Birkmeyer dude, like, this is cool. I could do this. He's actually talking about something I thought about doing. And like, how do I do that? But don't try to be a Xerox copy of Brandon Birkmeyer, right? Like he's taken, but use him as influence, right? I wanted to be Allen Iverson, but unfortunately I have this body. And, I can't do the crossover. But, maybe I'll use a little influence and a little Dirk Nowitzki and then you get, somebody who can't even make it in a high school basketball team. But my point is, like, I think a lot of people want to follow a structure, step 1 through 23, and create the same ClickFunnels site that somebody else did that made them quote unquote $1 million in 14 days. And, then that's another reason why they quit, right? Is like, hey, I followed this to a T and I was supposed to make this money, or I was supposed to do that, and it didn't work out for me.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And I think Jim might like this part of the story for me. So I don't just pick something to aim at and be like, I'm going to copy that, right? But I definitely get very curious about like, what are all the things that they did and try to model things. But then I actually break things out kind of a unique way that I think is just the way I think. I start with small objectives, right? And then like, what's the little, or I call it operations. It's like, what's the little operation I can run? And I was thinking military, that's why I called you out, Jim. So I was like, little operation. So like, what's the little operation I need to take care of that's a quick win that's going to get me one little step closer to the thing I want to do? I want to start a podcast. What's the little quick win there? Maybe I'll buy a microphone and like come up with some cover art and an idea. Okay. Like whatever it might be. Like, what's the quick win operation that's you can get in, get out, and just make some progress, right? And then I think one step bigger than that about campaigns. So when I was taking on the speaking thing, I was like, what's my campaign? My campaign for this 3 months or 6 months is public speaking or is a book. So I have projects that have a time-based, component to them. They aren't like an overnight success. They're going to take some work, but they're going to get me there. So I have my quick wins or in my operations. I have my campaigns that I'm like, this is what I'm working on for the next few months. And then I have my mission, like the bigger goal that I'm aiming towards. And that might be a North Star that's moving a little bit here and there, but generally it's guided towards, one purpose that is connected to this, like my reason for wanting to do the things I do. But if I can think like that, if I can start with a mission and then break them down to the campaigns and then even some operations under that, like I have an actionable thing I can do every day. I'm like, what's a little thing I can do today? And is this contributing? Is this a milestone I'm going to reach on my way to getting this book out? Like promoting a book, like it's not done after you write it. Promoting it, one more campaign now. Like how many podcasts can I go on to talk about this book? And how many, like Amazon ads do I need to run to promote this book? And how many conferences I need to go to speak at and hand out this book? Like that's the campaign we're in the middle of right now, and that helps me actually focus my energy and I look backwards and suddenly I've accomplished like a ton of objectives, a ton of operations, a few campaigns each year. And I'm like, I've actually accomplished something. You look back and you're like, wow, like I didn't even know I could accomplish all that if I just said I was going to at the beginning. I had no idea.
So you didn't, when you set out to do the book, you didn't set like, what do they call it, the big, hairy, audacious goal or something like that. You didn't set that. You just said, you structured it like you just said, or did you have a goal and how close are you to attaining it? There we go.
Well, first off, this is about the North Star, right? Because first off, the goal was speaking. And then my mentor was like, well, you have to write a book. So I had to completely pause one campaign and switch to the other because it was hard to do just both. So I didn't build a speaking reel. I just said, okay, I'm going to figure this book thing out. So I had to go down that rabbit hole. So like, first off, your campaigns can shift based on what you learn along the way. But then, like when I was tackling this, I had to break it down and say, okay, well, how do people write books? And how do I want to write a book? Like, how does this campaign work for Brandon? And I was like, well, my biggest barrier to writing a book, the reason I had that feeling of I don't want to do this is because typing, like the way they tell you to write a book, like type for 600 words every day. Just do that. Like that sounds like nails on a chalkboard to me. Like, why would I want to sit down and type every day? I love podcasting. I love recording my thoughts, but typing sounds super slow to me. And so then I realized, I did more research and I realized, like a lot of authors dictate their books. They speak their books. I was like, well, yeah, I do that all the time.
Yeah.
And I'll like, to be honest, and I was like, okay, well, how do I do this with my schedule? Well, I can usually fit in a half of a day worth of recording. And in a half a day, guess what? I can record about, what was it? Like 4 hours, which is like, I would get 8,000 words out.
Wow.
In a few hours of recording, or more. And in like 8 sessions, I had the book written. Like it was, I had 60,000 words in, 8 sessions. So it was like, okay, well, I do this naturally. You guys do this naturally all the time. It's probably easier than you think. I just had to have a good outline and then a good editor. But anyway, I figured out the process. I had to chunk it down to things that worked and then do it a way that would work for me specifically. I don't have like a cool framework for you guys for that one, but
no. Listen, it sounds it's your voice then, right? It's not a, there's no rocket emojis and delving into things like ChatGPT gives you. This is the real voice of Brandon Birkmeyer on this book.
It's a process,
So Brandon, along this process too, have you found like during your campaign, it's like, I probably shouldn't have done, this show or that show. Has it helped you make better decisions when you say, hey, this is really the right audience for my book and for what I'm trying to do? Have you found that to be part of the challenge?
I think the earliest part was a challenge for me. Like I went to a lot of conferences that were like, I was going to the Speakers Association conference because I'd never been to it before. And I was trying to become a speaker. And it was like, well, what are you speaking about? Because I want the book to be what I'm speaking about. Like I wanted to connect. I wanted to have a keynote that connected to my main idea. And man, I had a lot of trouble figuring out what this book was going to be about, because it's like, who are you for? And what's your message? Because personal branding is always what my like message is, like personal brand.
Yeah.
But then what do you want to do with that? Is it personal branding for entrepreneurs? Is it personal branding for content creators or coaches? Is it personal branding for corporate leaders? And what part, like, is it one stage in the process or is it the whole process? So I had a lot of like questioning to figure out like what felt right. And I asked questions along the way to people I know. I was like, well, if I want to make money speaking, what do I do with this knowledge? And a lot of them said, well, like one of the more profitable spaces for speakers is speaking into corporate.
Yep.
And I was like, well, that actually aligns because I worked 17 years in corporate, and my story is my realization that I didn't have a personal brand growing up in corporate. So how do I teach that back to people in corporate? So it all started to connect and make sense that this was the book that was right for me to write to my older self, my younger self, I should say. And things started to come together in that way.
So, I was thinking of this question earlier, and now that we're back talking about the speaking thing and speaking specifically to companies, to corporations, and talking about personal branding, there's a part of me that thinks that wouldn't some companies look at it somewhat threatening? Okay, you're coming in and you're talking to my employees about them creating a brand that they take with them when they leave this company. So is that thought process out there, or is it like is that old school stupid thinking, or like what? I just think about that. Like, here this guy's going to come in here and tell all these people how they should create, go play on LinkedIn all day instead of doing their jobs.
Chris, that is old school stupid thinking.
All right, good.
Who talks like that? No, excuse me. No. So, yeah, I think that could have been a concern, right? But how I think of it is this: I think you can frame something based on, if you want to be afraid of it or if you want to chase it, right? If you want to be afraid of it, yeah, sure. Like you're going to teach people how to build personal brands, and they're going to leave you someday. What I would rather spin that to say is, wouldn't you want to be the company that is known for developing the best and brightest talent in your industry? Like, wouldn't you want to be known? Because what happens when that is the case? Well, when you're known as the company that has the best people working somewhere, it's like a magnet. It attracts other great people who want to now come in and learn that system that way. Like a company like when McKinsey got into consulting and BCG and those like big management consulting groups, like they put in processes where you came in out of college knowing nothing about how to do this. They trained you on the job in their way and how to run case studies and do their work. And it's like trial by fire. And when you come out of it, like you want to be hired, like companies want to hire you, not just to do that work, but eventually to be CEOs and CMOs because you were trained in that way. So yeah, I think, sure, it's a risk, but I'd rather take the risk on investing in my talent and getting them to want to invest in themselves. And guess what? If I'm a company worth working at, then I'll just have better employees, period. And maybe there's be a little bit of gratitude for being someone that believed in investing in you and helping you find that path to being a leader in your industry. And yeah, maybe you'll lose some people here or there, but I think you'd be better for it because their turnover is happening regardless. But I'd rather them leave, not because they didn't feel like they weren't growing, but because they felt like there's opportunity out there. But really, that's not what happens. Most people leave their jobs because they feel like they're not growing. Yeah. Fun stat, because I have fun stats in front of me for these kinds of things.
We love fun stats on this show.
Nearly 1 in 4 people quit because they felt stuck in their role or in an industry with no growth opportunities.
Wow.
So 1 in every 4 people, like that's a massive amount of people at a company, especially a large company. And if you can be that company that makes them feel like they aren't stuck, then maybe you're one-upping the competition and probably saving some money along the way in terms of turnover.
Right. And if you're a leader, you're a manager or you're a boss, whatever, at a particular company, I had one of the mentors I had would always say this to me. When somebody else hired a person away from me or whatever, he would say to me, "The good ones don't last long." Right. And it's true. So why not give them, what you can give them? Because I feel like that comes back. And I love the idea of saying, hey, let's create a space that other people will want to be because we've created great talent. Like, wow, they developed this talent at this particular company. And so I'm going to go there. This is the place that I want to go because that's going to help me, as opposed to, just sticking them in a chair and doing the job just good enough so that they can be there long enough to do the job to get your market share where you want it to be. And I think that's, why don't more people think like that, Brandon? I guess you wouldn't get business speaking on stages if they were good at it, right?
Yeah, I don't know. Again, routines, right? We just get stuck in those routines.
That's true.
I think it's interesting because when people do feel invested in, they stay. And like I definitely stayed at places and didn't chase the paycheck because I felt like I was around the right bosses, the right team that had that family feel, that like we're all investing and helping each other out. We're like in the same boat together. And those are the companies where you're like, oh, like I could be here 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. I never felt like that just because they paid me more. It was only when I felt like we had mutually aligned goals and I was investing in the company and they were investing in me. That's the only time I've ever stayed somewhere long enough for it to matter.
Amazing stuff, man. Amazing stuff. I mean, we could go on for hours, but unfortunately, Jim has a military schedule that he has to stick to, so we're gonna have to cut it. So, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are in the house, and by the way, we did have this comment earlier, Jim. I just thought I'd bring this up for you. Scott Ayers just wanted to say, "How about them Cowboys?" I wasn't about to interrupt the flow for football talk, even though we went the Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan route. That's pretty cool that you named your son Jordan after Michael Jordan.
Yeah, my wife didn't think it was as cool. Because I came up with that name in high school, and when I met my wife, I was like, in case if things get serious, just so you know, I've already named my firstborn son. I hope that's not a problem. So she thought I was a little weird at the time, but that it's par for the course.
Worked out.
Luckily, we had a girl first, so she got to choose the girl name, and then then the boy came second.
What's the girl's name? Your daughter,
Hannah
and Jordan. Yeah. It's just that you're living the perfect life in North Carolina, man. It's you're still in North Carolina. You're like in that area. Awesome.
Yeah. Raleigh, North Carolina. Loving it. It's like the mecca for suburban family life. It's great.
Amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, Brandon Birkmeyer, the book is Front and Center Leadership, How Leaders Use Personal Branding to Stand Out and How You Can Too. I love that subtitle. Is that for search engine optimization, Brandon?
I stole it. I modeled it. I stole it from one of my favorite books, Gary Vee.
Oh, okay. Crushing it. And at the end it says, and how you can too. How you can too.
And I was like, I love that line. It's stuck in my head.
The color scheme looks pretty familiar too.
I always pay homage to, but like, it's not the same, right? Like they're similar books, but like, obviously it's a different book.
Mm-hmm. It kind of is the same book, Brandon.
That works too.
I'm just kidding.
Well, it's funny. Like when I start my podcast. Sorry, Jim, if you got to go. But no, when I start my podcast,
I'm kidding. I was kidding about it.
I start we all have a trailer for our show. Mine was like those movie theater voice guys, and like he was like in a world where, and I was I have to, I have to use this corny model because. Like I like that. Like it speaks to me in my own tongue-in-cheek way. So most of the things I do in some way have elements of things that I love. And Gary Vee was one of the first people I listened to about personal branding when I was still in corporate. So I was like, okay, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. Like I'm in.
Yeah. I mean, listen, success leaves clues, right? And you're not making a Xerox copy of Gary Vee and the movie guy voices. You're using them as influences, and it's working for you, man. And we can't thank you enough for stopping by and taking time out of your busy schedule and being on our show, man. Congratulations on all the success of the book, and man, you're awesome.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jim. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you.
All right, everybody. As always, don't fear the gear.
Thanks for listening to Dealcasters. Congratulations, you've taken another step forward in your content creation journey. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe or follow button here in your favorite podcast player so you can be reminded every time we drop an episode.
We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. And if you're wanting to watch our shows live on Amazon, feel free to follow Dealcasters Live as well at dealcasters.live.
Follow us on Twitter or subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we also included added content that you cannot find anywhere else.
If you have questions about this episode or have something you want us to review, you can also email us at dealcasters@dealcasters.live. Thanks again for listening, and you know the deal. Don't fear the gear.